And recognizing that I'm the finale for today, I'll do my best to be as concise as possible and still get the message across. I am Timothy Carlin. I'm a senior manager at the University of New Hampshire Interoperability Lab. Please feel free to ask questions as I go. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised to see some repeated slides. Again, we'll go over a brief overview of the IWG and the Interop Logo group as they are. We'll review the cluster again, take a look at the test events from this past year and upcoming and potentials for future work. So the IWG is basically the open group that is responsible for kind of being the overarching umbrella for the interoperability testing itself. It sort of defines the partnership with our lab and the interop tests themselves, as well as the architecture of the program. Both of those documents are links to the actual slides, so then when you get them later on, you can click and it'll bring you directly to our website where those documents are hosted. Again, this group itself is open to all OFA members to provide their input as they'd like. The ILG, Interoperability Logo group itself, is slightly different in that this is actually the operating arm of the logo itself, where we're validating OFED, actually doing the testing, and maintaining the cluster and the environment itself. Of course, IB, IWARP, and Rocky are all represented here, as well as the various upper layer protocols. Members of this group are eligible to receive the logo upon passing all the mandatory tests.
You say members, I think you just said it, but just to emphasize the word, that's members of the OFILG.
That's right.
Different from members of the OFA, right?
That's right. This is the members of the logo group itself. So because the interoperability testing is the primary focus of the group, this is the effort that's done at the lab itself and requires an extra commitment to the lab, monetary commitment. So that's a sort of a subgroup of membership. I'll emphasize it later as well, but if this is something you're interested in as you see the presentation later on, please do let me or any of the executive team know, and we'll be happy to help you out with that. The logo list itself, I didn't include the actual list here, but again, there's the link, and basically on our website is the actual list of all of the equipment that has received a logo. Basically, this means you've passed all of the mandatory testing that we run. There are a variety of should and may tests, and those in some cases get promoted to mandatories, but basically this is the one-stop shop for validated equipment. About the cluster itself, of course, hosted at the IOL in Durham. Again, sort of a repeated slide here. 7 racks of equipment, plenty of nodes, switches, and the various targets. And another somewhat repeated slide. Probably the most important thing to note here is the maintenance that goes into keeping the cluster up. Everything that we do there, as much as possible, is automated and scripted. This is so that we can load all of the new OFED releases as fast as possible. That means installing the new operating systems, often with Pixie, and then installing on top of those whatever version of OFED we're targeting. This helps it keep it fast, but it doesn't come without its own maintenance tasks itself. In addition, the cluster itself is available remotely. This is very helpful for debugging our code after it's or your code after it gets installed, and providing logs pretty quickly. But it also means it's open for you to log into and run some tests on your own. Again, if you're a member of the interop group itself, you're eligible to log in. Just let me know if you'd like that sort of access. And I can be happy to walk you through the cluster and how to connect to everything. Again, somewhat repeated here, but the test topology. Again, the point here is all of these connections require cables and not a small feat to keep the racks neat and organized with all of the turnover that happens somewhat regularly. So a nod here to the guys that keep the cluster up at the lab. And if you're not completely familiar with the lab, I should note our primary workforce is undergraduate students from the University of New Hampshire. They're the ones who are really doing all the hard work. I just help clear roadblocks for them. So they're the ones keeping our scripts up and making sure that automation works, and of course organizing our test bed. So those are the guys that 9 times out of 10, they'll be helping you with any day-to-day problems you might come across and you email us about. So this is something else that I was warned about this, that in the Mac to Microsoft conversion, this topology ended up sideways. It's kind of fun. And of course, the Rocky topology. So this is just some notes about the October debug event. You can read the slide, but the thing to note here is we do have, it operates on a 6-month or biannual schedule. Basically, twice a year we'll have a debug event, the start of which is attended or could be attended at the lab itself in Durham. We'll work on debugging whatever we'd like basically during that event, with the idea of targeting the test suite itself. Following the debug, we'll go ahead and kick off the logo event. The January 2015 logo event, as I'm calling it, covered these various releases. InfiniBand and iWarp, and I can't remember if I have a slide for this. I don't think I do yet. InfiniBand and iWarp are just about wrapped up, actually. I think we're, if we haven't written those reports already, and I think we have, we're just dotting the T's and crossing the I's on that. Rocky, as some of you may be well aware, posed some issues for this logo, so stay tuned on that. And here's a list of the tests that we're targeting for the upcoming event, which is a foreshadowing for a slide that we haven't touched on yet. One thing to note here is transport independent tests, ISER. We list here as being in beta. I am looking at filling in some testing there for ISER as a new upper layer protocol, obviously not mandatory yet. And of course the tests for iWarp and Rocky. Probably more interesting to look at later. And of course, looking at the test suite itself online. So as I mentioned, the upcoming event is April 20th. It's also worth noting these events are always preceded, or as much as we're able to, precede them by the IBTA Plugfest to, again, make it as simple as possible to attend and get value out of both events. We're talking about 318 or 320 here, but given some of the results with the kernel, this might end up being 4.0. Stay tuned on that. Again, ISER and NFS over RDMA are sure to be items of conversation for that event. And then the October 2015 Plugfest, there are the dates for that. So looking ahead, there's just a list of things that we're looking at. Some of this might be familiar as being on the slide from last year. Some of it may be new. We've heard a lot about the virtualization, and maybe there's a spot in the OFILG for some of that, as well as incorporating more OSs. Rocky v2 is another one, and of course IPv6, which is near and dear to my heart, as being where I started at the Interoperability Lab. And of course, overall collaboration with the other working groups. We obviously have quite a bit of interaction with the EWG in this working group for obvious reasons. I myself am going to be taking a role to be even more present during those meetings as much as possible. But also, I think there's clearly an opportunity to collaborate with the Interfaces Working Group and the Verbs Extensions Working Group. Basically on the notion that it doesn't mean we have to do everything. It doesn't mean that that has to be something we have to do, but at least by being there and seeing if there is an opportunity can help to see. And of course, the last bullet there is conformance, which is not a subject for the Interoperability Working Group, but perhaps down the road there's something to do from a conformance standpoint. So I think my overall point, the last takeaway before the thank you slide, and we'll wrap up real early, is if there's anything that we're not doing that you'd like to see us do, or maybe you'd like some more information on, please don't hesitate to let us know. I did not include the meeting times for this working group here, but it's every other Tuesday afternoon. I think it's Tuesday. To call in and where we give an overview of what's going on. On the other hand, if you're a member and you just like to log into the cluster itself and play around, again, please let me know. And be happy to take any questions.
Spend a minute explaining your role with respect to what I'll call policy, it's a bad word, you know what I mean, versus engineering testing.
Sure, yeah. So the Interoperability Lab, will give just a brief moment of background here. We're third party, we're non-neutral, non-profit lab associated with the University of New Hampshire. In keeping with that neutrality, we really like to focus on the technology itself and improving the technology. That said, where we like to kind of stay out of is any sort of policy or rulemaking or anything that's sort of not technically based. We end up being experts on the standards and the various frameworks that get defined, which actually puts us in a pretty good decision to figure out if what we're seeing is valid or not. That said, we are always happy to give our opinion and kind of guide decisions, but when it comes down to actually issuing a stamp or not, that's typically where we stop short. You'll notice this logo actually has our logo on it. I believe it's the only one that actually says IOL tested, but what isn't here is IOL approved. It's approved by the OFA. The OFA is the one who defines the program and defines the testing. We run the testing. Our main product is our report, which is all of the reports that we've issued to the vendors are available, obviously, to those vendors, and those who wish to make them available upon passing all tests, those reports are also on the website itself. So the reports are the main product. That's what we give you as evidence of the testing and that it was all passed. The expectation is those reports will then be used to apply for a logo. Obviously, cases come up where testing issues arise and questions about, well, is this a pass? Is this something that we can still let through? And again, happy to, and we frequently do, give our input on that. But that actually goes up to the arbitration committee to fully define the result of. Is that good for you?
How long does it take to run your test?
Yeah, it varies, and it depends too. So, and thanks, Woody, for the nice comment about it. We do try to run and be as helpful as possible in hitting on as many RCs as possible. Debug events, I think typically, the event itself at UNH, I think is a week. Following that, debugs can take several weeks after that to actually identify a good one. The logo testing, this one started in January. January 2015 logo is what I called it. iWarp and IB has just finished up the report writing, so I would say figure on 8 weeks for the actual logo, and that encompasses IB, iWarp, and a fair bit of Rocky testing as well, though it wasn't fully completed yet. So we have 3 students, hopefully at all times, so they can focus on each of the 3 areas. So that's done in parallel as much as possible. And again, that's working with vendors to get the right version of code installed, to make sure we don't have any conflicts of software versions and things like that. So I was talking, I had a thought, and it has slipped out of my head. Thought I saw a question. Yes.
Pardon me if I missed it. Times they have nights core, nights landing, or on based systems to your servers?
There certainly can be. I'm not aware of any today. Was there any plans to add any Knights Corner, Knights Landing servers to the test bed? ARM-based machines, yeah.
Yeah, I know the group had asked me about the possibility at some one point in time about getting these corners, but haven't quite found the right people that would build the lab. But he was interested in that longer term, and actually, maybe you and I should talk offline. It's probably more important for K&L that's coming, especially the self-move one, that get something into their lab.
Just to cover the response from Woody, that was something, the topic has been brought up before, and I think it's just a problem with getting access to the resources to do it.
So you should explain that the materials in the lab are donated by the vendors, in some cases by Intel, by AMD, by HP, and others like that.
That's right. Yeah, the IOL built up our interoperability test beds. Our crown jewels are our test beds, and those test beds have been built up over the years from contributions from vendors. This consortium, I call it a consortium, this group at the IOL, the OFA consortium, is somewhat unique in that it's sort of governed, and the testing is sort of under this umbrella of the OFA. Other groups, it truly is very much one-to-one with our vendors. But yeah, we don't actually own too much of the equipment. It's something that's been contributed to us on loan, in some cases truly donated, and in rare cases we do go out and buy it.
So get a hold of them, not necessarily.
Absolutely, thank you.